The Vailian Empire was the most powerful force in the known galaxy. 12 star systems bowed to its rule. Hundreds of species called it home. And at its center sat Emperor Draxon, a ruler whose word could reshape entire worlds. But for 2 years, the Emperor had ruled alone. His wife, Empress Lyria, had died protecting their son from assassins who'd infiltrated the palace during a diplomatic gathering. She'd thrown herself between the killers and 8-year-old Prince Kael, giving the guards just enough time to respond. The Emperor had lost his partner. The prince had lost his mother. And the Empire had lost its heart. Now the Imperial Council was getting impatient. They gathered in the throne room wearing their finest robes, representing the oldest and most powerful families in the galaxy. Lord Theron spoke first, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. Your Majesty, the dynasty must continue. The Empire needs stability. You must choose a new empress. Emperor Draxon sat on his throne, looking older than his years. I'm aware of my duties, Lord Theron. Then let us arrange the selection, another council member added eagerly. The House of Velthara has a daughter who commands 5 battle fleets. The crystalline matriarchy offers a princess who can heal fatal wounds with her touch. We have candidates from 20 royal houses. The Emperor raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice was firm. I will remarry. But I will not choose. Confusion rippled through the council. Your Majesty? My son will choose, Draxon said. Prince Kael will select his new mother. Whoever he picks will become empress. The council exploded with objections, but the Emperor's decision was final. Within weeks, the palace transformed into a glittering circus of courtship. Noble daughters arrived from across the galaxy, each more impressive than the last. There was Princess Vila from the Etherian Kingdom, whose skin shimmered like starlight and who could read surface thoughts. Lady Zira of the KRYNN Warlords stood 7 feet tall with silver armor grafted to her bones, undefeated in 300 battles. Duchess Marin from the Crystalline Worlds could manipulate matter at the molecular level, literally reshaping reality with her mind. They paraded through the palace in gowns that cost more than small planets, attended by servants and advisors. Each one demonstrated her abilities during formal presentations. Princess Vila predicted the council members' questions before they asked. Lady Zira shattered a training dummy with her bare hands. Duchess Marin turned sand into diamonds as party tricks. Prince Kael sat through every presentation with the same blank expression. When asked his opinion, he simply said, "No thank you," and returned to his rooms. The candidates tried everything. They brought him gifts from distant worlds. They told him stories of their heroic ancestors. They promised him siblings, armies, entire planets if he'd just choose them. Some were kind about it. Others grew frustrated. A few were clearly more interested in the throne than the boy sitting beside it. None of them noticed the human woman quietly cleaning in the background. Her name was Rebecca Cole, though most people in the palace just called her the human maid, if they addressed her at all. She'd arrived from Earth 3 years ago through the Imperial Labor Program. Humans were still new to the galactic community, only discovered about 15 years prior. They were considered a minor species, interesting mostly because they had no special abilities whatsoever. No telepathy. No enhanced strength. No energy manipulation or healing powers or extended lifespans. Just normal people who lived normal lifespans and died normal deaths. In a galaxy full of species who could do incredible things, humans were basically invisible. Rebecca didn't mind being invisible. She'd taken the job for one reason: money. Her younger brother Tommy had a degenerative nerve condition that Earth's medical system couldn't treat. But Vailian medicine could fix him easily. The treatment cost more than her family would earn in 10 lifetimes. So Rebecca had signed a 7-year work contract, sending every credit she earned back home. She worked in the prince's wing of the palace, cleaning his bedroom, his study, and his private garden. She'd been doing it for 3 years, and in all that time, she'd barely spoken a dozen words to Prince Kael. It wasn't her place. She was staff. He was royalty. That's how things worked. But she noticed things about him. How he stared out the window for hours, watching ships come and go. How he flinched when people raised their voices. How he kept a small wooden bird his mother had carved for him under his pillow, holding it when he thought no one was watching. Rebecca had lost her own mother to cancer when she was 12. She recognized grief when she saw it. So she did small things. She made sure his favorite tea was always warm in the morning. She'd fold little origami animals from scrap paper during her breaks and leave them on his desk, different creatures each day. When she cleaned, she hummed old Earth songs her grandmother had taught her, folk tunes about mountains and rivers and home. She never tried to talk to him. Never imposed. She just tried to make his space feel a little less empty. Prince Kale never said anything, but sometimes she'd find the origami animals carefully arranged on his bookshelf instead of thrown away. And once, she'd heard him humming one of her songs. The selection process dragged on for months. The candidates grew more desperate and competitive. They argued about precedence and whose bloodline was purer. They formed alliances and sabotaged each other's presentations. The palace filled with tension and barely concealed hostility. Then came the state dinner. It was a massive formal event with delegates from 40 systems. Prince Kale was required to attend, sitting beside his father at the head table while the noble candidates displayed themselves like peacocks. The room blazed with lights and music and hundreds of conversations in dozens of languages. Rebecca was serving that night, part of the human staff carrying drinks and clearing plates. She was invisible as always, moving along the walls, keeping her head down. That's when she saw Prince Kale's face go pale. His breathing got faster. His hands started trembling. She'd seen panic attacks before, her brother got them sometimes. And she knew that look. The prince stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. The room went quiet. He looked around wildly, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. He was 8 years old and terrified and surrounded by hundreds of strangers in a room that felt like a cage. The noble candidates froze. This wasn't in the script. They looked at each other uncertainly. Princess Vila reached out telepathically but pulled back, sensing his mind was in chaos. Lady Zira moved toward him but stopped, clearly unsure how to handle a frightened child without breaking him. The others just stared. Rebecca didn't think. She just moved. She dropped her serving tray with a crash that made everyone jump, pushed through the crowd of nobility, and scooped the prince up in her arms. She felt the guards tense, but Emperor Draxon raised his hand to stop them. She carried Prince Kale out of the dining hall, down 2 corridors, and into the quiet garden where she sometimes took her breaks. She sat on a bench and held him while he shook, not saying anything at first, just being there. Finally, she spoke softly. "Breathe with me, okay? In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Just like a square. Can you picture a square?" The throne room erupted like someone had thrown a grenade into a fireworks factory. Council members were shouting over each other, their translator devices creating a cacophony of overlapping languages. The noble candidates stood in a cluster, their faces showing various shades of shock, anger, and disbelief. "This is absolutely unacceptable." Lord Theron's voice cut through the chaos. "A human? A servant? Your Majesty, with all due respect, this makes a mockery of thousands of years of tradition." Princess Vila stepped forward, her starlight skin flickering with agitation. "I can read minds across star systems. I commanded my first fleet at age 15. And you're telling me I've been rejected for someone who cleans floors?" Lady Zira's silver armor clinked as she crossed her arms. "No offense to the human, but she has no combat training, no political experience, no enhanced abilities whatsoever. How exactly is she supposed to protect the prince? With a mop?" Emperor Draxon let them vent. He'd expected this reaction. Hell, he'd had the same thoughts himself when Kale first said the name. But then he'd watched the security footage from the garden that night. He'd seen Rebecca teaching his son to breathe, showing him Earth constellations, making him laugh for the first time since Lyria died. And he remembered something his late wife had told him during one of their last conversations. "The best mothers aren't chosen by bloodline or ability," Lyria had said. "They're chosen by the heart. By who shows up when it matters." When the shouting finally died down, Draxon spoke quietly. "My son has made his choice." "Then unmake it," demanded Duchess Marin. "You're the Emperor. Override him." "I gave him my word that he could choose. I won't break that promise." The council members exchanged glances. They'd been outmaneuvered and they knew it. But Lord Theron wasn't finished. A slow smile spread across his face. "Very well, Your Majesty. If you insist on honoring such an unconventional choice, then we must insist on honoring tradition as well. We invoke the trial of worthiness." The room went silent. Even the Emperor looked surprised. The trial of worthiness was ancient law, created thousands of years ago when a minor planetary governor had tried to marry into the royal family. It consisted of 5 challenges designed to prove that a candidate possessed the qualities necessary to lead the empire. It hadn't been invoked in over 3 centuries because everyone who married into the royal family came from acceptable bloodlines. It was designed to be nearly impossible. "You can't be serious," the Emperor said. "The law is clear, Your Majesty. Any candidate from outside the noble houses must pass the trial. All 5 challenges. No exceptions. Lord Theron's smile widened. Unless, of course, the human wishes to withdraw her candidacy. All eyes turned to Rebecca. She stood near the back of the room in her plain work uniform, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She'd been trying to refuse this insanity for the past 20 minutes, but every time she opened her mouth, Prince Kale would squeeze her hand tighter and look at her with those hopeful eyes. Rebecca's voice came out as a squeak. She cleared her throat and tried again. I'm nobody special, Your Majesty. I clean rooms. I make beds. I'm just trying to help my brother back on Earth. I can't be an empress. I don't know how. Then you forfeit. Lord Theron pressed. Rebecca looked down at Prince Kale. The boy was staring up at her with an expression that broke her heart. He'd been so sad for so long, and she just wanted to help. Now she was trapped between disappointing him and attempting 5 impossible challenges that would probably humiliate her in front of the entire galaxy. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Rebecca Marie Cole, you don't run from hard things just because they are hard. You try. You fail if you have to, but you try. She took a deep breath. What are the challenges? The council looked genuinely surprised. They'd expected her to quit immediately. Lord Theron recovered first, pulling up a holographic display. The trial of worthiness consists of 5 challenges. Strategic command, where you must demonstrate tactical brilliance. The judgment of wisdom, where you must solve an impossible diplomatic crisis. The test of strength, single combat with the Imperial champion. Diplomatic grace, where you must host a formal banquet for the galaxy's most important dignitaries. And finally, the trial of sacrifice, where you must prove what you're willing to give up for the Empire. Each challenge sounded worse than the last. Rebecca felt her stomach drop. You have 1 week to prepare for the first trial, Lord Theron continued. I suggest you use it wisely. Though frankly, I don't think any amount of preparation will help. The other candidates were already celebrating quietly among themselves. This human would fail spectacularly, probably within the first challenge, and then they could get back to proper business. The week passed in a blur. Rebecca tried to study, but what was she supposed to study? Military tactics? She'd never even seen a warship up close. She spent hours in the Imperial Library, surrounded by data tablets written in languages she barely understood, feeling more lost by the minute. The night before the first trial, she sat in her tiny staff quarters with her head in her hands. Her roommate, another human woman named Lisa who worked in the kitchens, tried to be encouraging. Maybe you'll get lucky, Lisa offered. Maybe the simulation will glitch or something. That's not how luck works, Rebecca muttered. There was a knock at the door. When Rebecca opened it, she found Prince Kale standing there in his pajamas, having apparently snuck away from his guards. You're going to do great tomorrow, he said with the absolute certainty only an 8-year-old could muster. Kale, I don't know anything about military strategy. My mom didn't either, before she became empress. She was a botanist. She studied plants. He held out a data tablet. I found her old journals. She wrote about how she learned things. She said it was okay to not know stuff, as long as you were willing to learn. Rebecca took the tablet, her eyes stinging. Thank you. I believe in you, Kale said simply, then hugged her and ran back toward his rooms before the guards noticed he was gone. Rebecca stayed up all night reading Empress Lyria's journals. They were remarkable, full of observations about politics, people, and the Empire. But what struck her most was a passage Lyria had written shortly after her coronation. They expect me to be something I'm not, Lyria had written. They want a warrior queen, a strategic genius, someone who fits their mold. But I am who I am. A botanist who loves growing things. So perhaps I'll approach this empire the way I approach a garden. Not trying to force things to grow in ways that aren't natural to them, but understanding what each part needs and helping it flourish. Maybe that's wisdom too. Rebecca closed the tablet as dawn broke over the palace. She had an idea. It was probably stupid. It would probably fail. But it was the only chance she had. The Strategic Command trial was held in the Imperial War Room, a massive chamber with holographic displays showing entire star systems. Military officers filled the observation deck, eager to watch the human Maid embarrass herself. The noble candidate sat in the front row, already smirking. Admiral Corvin, the Empire's highest-ranking military officer, explained the scenario. You'll command a small fleet against a superior enemy force. The simulation is based on a real battle from 50 years ago. Every candidate who's ever attempted this trial has failed. The enemy has more ships, better weapons, and superior positioning. Your objective is simple: survive for 1 hour or achieve victory. The simulation adapts to your tactics, so don't bother trying anything you've seen before. Rebecca stood at the command console, staring at the holographic display. 15 friendly ships in green. 40 enemy ships in red. The enemy had them surrounded in an asteroid field with nowhere to run. Every military instinct said this was unwinnable. Which meant military instincts were the wrong approach. She thought about her dad, who'd been a Navy officer before he retired. He used to tell her stories about historical battles over dinner. Battles where the underdog had won not through superior force, but through creativity. Rebecca's fingers flew across the console. She wasn't thinking like a military commander. She was thinking like someone who'd grown up hearing stories about how humans fought when they were outmatched. All ships, she said into the comm system, her voice steadier than she felt. We're going to do something they won't expect. In the observation deck, Admiral Corvin leaned forward. The human was doing something very strange with her fleet formation. This was going to be interesting. Rebecca's fleet scattered in what looked like complete chaos. Ships broke formation and fled in different directions through the asteroid field, appearing panicked and disorganized. The enemy fleet, programmed with thousands of years of military doctrine, did exactly what any predator does when prey runs. They pursued, splitting their forces to chase down the fleeing ships. What is she doing? Princess Vila whispered from the observation deck. She's just running away? But Admiral Corvin's eyes had narrowed. He'd seen something. The human ships weren't actually fleeing randomly. They were leading the enemy into specific corridors between the asteroids, stretching their formation thinner and thinner. Then Rebecca's ship stopped running. All at once, they reversed course and hit their pursuers hard. But they didn't stay to fight. They'd fire, then retreat again, then circle back from a different angle. Hit and run. Over and over. She's using guerrilla tactics, Corvin muttered, a hint of admiration in his voice. She's turned a space battle into an ambush. The enemy fleet tried to regroup, but Rebecca had divided them too well. Every time they formed up, she'd send 1 or 2 ships to harass their flanks, breaking their concentration. She used the asteroids like cover, hiding her ship's signatures until the last moment. She even deliberately damaged some of her own ships, making them look crippled, then sprung traps when the enemy moved in for easy kills. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't how the Empire fought. It was scrappy and improvised and completely unpredictable. 45 minutes into the simulation, the enemy fleet's coordination had completely fallen apart. They were chasing shadows, wasting ammunition, getting frustrated. Rebecca saw her opening. She gathered her remaining ships, now down to 11, and hit the enemy command vessel with everything she had. Without their flagship's coordination, the rest of the enemy fleet crumbled. The simulation ended with victory flashing across the screen. The war room was dead silent. Rebecca stood at the console, shaking slightly, hardly believing what had just happened. She'd expected to last maybe 10 minutes. Admiral Corvin started clapping slowly. Then other officers joined in. Even some of the noble candidates looked grudgingly impressed, though Lord Theron's face had gone an interesting shade of purple. Unorthodox, Corvin announced. Completely against standard doctrine. And absolutely brilliant. The human passes the first trial. 2 days later came the judgment of wisdom. Rebecca sat in a council chamber with holographic representatives of 2 species who'd been at war for 300 years. The Kelvar and the Dryn had been killing each other over a disputed moon for so long that nobody even remembered why the moon was important in the first place. Previous candidates had proposed complex treaties, military demilitarized zones, economic sanctions, and rotating ownership schedules. Nothing had worked. The hatred ran too deep. Rebecca listened to both sides yell at each other for 20 minutes. The Kelvar representative kept bringing up an attack from 200 years ago. The Dryn representative countered with an atrocity from a century before that. Back and forth, an endless cycle of revenge and counter-revenge. Finally, Rebecca held up her hand. Can I ask a stupid question? Both representatives looked surprised. Candidates usually pretended to have all the answers. What's actually on this moon you're fighting over? That's irrelevant, the Kelvar snapped. It's sovereign territory. But what's there? Like, actually there? The Dryn representative hesitated. It's mostly ice. Some mineral deposits. Nothing particularly valuable. So you've been killing each other for 300 years over ice and some rocks. Both aliens bristled, but Rebecca pressed on. Here's what I don't get. You've both spent enormous resources on this war. Ships, weapons, lives. What if you spent those same resources doing something together instead? What if that moon became a joint research station? Both species working side by side on something that benefits everyone. Work with them. The Kelvar looked offended. Impossible. Why? Because you hate each other? Okay, fine, hate each other. But hate each other while discovering new technologies, advancing science, creating something your grandchildren might actually be proud of instead of just inheriting another war. It was simple. Almost embarrassingly simple. The kind of idea that made the council members roll their eyes. But something shifted in the room. The DRYNN representative tilted his head. A joint station. Split everything 50-50, Rebecca said. Funding, staffing, credit for discoveries. Make it so successful that fighting over it would be stupid because you'd both lose something valuable. Give yourselves a reason to cooperate that's stronger than your reasons to fight. The two representatives looked at each other for the first time without pure hatred. They started asking questions. What kind of research? How would command structure work? What about security? An hour later, they'd agreed to a preliminary framework. It would take years to implement, but it was the first real progress in 3 centuries. The adjudicators marked her second victory with visible reluctance. The third trial nearly broke her spirit before it even started. The test of strength meant single combat against Vorthan, the Empire's champion warrior. He was a KRYNN, which meant he stood 7 feet tall with muscle density 3 times that of a human. He'd been training in combat since he could walk. He'd never lost a match in 20 years. Rebecca stood in the arena wearing padded armor that felt ridiculous on her 5'6" frame. She held a practice sword that might as well have been a toothpick. The crowd filled the stadium seats, thousands of spectators from dozens of species, all waiting to watch the human get demolished. Prince Kale sat in the royal box, his small hands gripping the railing. The match began. Vorthan moved with terrifying speed for someone his size. Rebecca tried to defend herself, really tried, but it was like a child fighting a professional boxer. She lasted exactly 28 seconds before Vorthan's blade stopped an inch from her throat. She'd lost. Completely, utterly, without question. The crowd started murmuring. The trial was over. The human had failed. But Rebecca didn't leave the arena. She lowered her sword, then bowed formally to Vorthan, the way her father had taught her to show respect to a superior opponent. "Thank you for the match," she said clearly. "You're incredibly skilled. Would you be willing to teach me? I know I lost, but I'd like to learn proper form someday. If you're willing." Vorthan looked confused. Defeated opponents usually slunk away in shame. They didn't ask for lessons. Rebecca turned to face the adjudicators. "I know I lost the fight. I'm not a warrior and I never will be. But the trial tests strength, right? I'd like to offer a different interpretation." Lord Theron leaned forward with a smug expression. "This should be entertaining." "True strength isn't about defeating every opponent," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "It's about knowing your limitations and having the courage to admit them. It's about seeking alliance with those who are stronger in areas where you're weak. It's about learning instead of pretending you already know everything." She pulled up a holographic display of the ancient trial texts on her datapad. She'd spent the last 2 nights reading every historical document she could find. The original trial text says the candidate must demonstrate the strength necessary to lead. Not the strength to win every fight. Leadership strength means knowing when to fight and when to seek help. It means building teams of people stronger than you in their specialties. It means having the humility to admit you don't have all the answers. She looked directly at Vorthan. "I can't beat you in combat. But if I were Empress, I'd want you training our soldiers. I'd want your expertise protecting this empire. That's the kind of strength that actually matters." The adjudicators huddled together, reviewing the ancient texts. The debate went on for 2 hours. Half the council argued that she'd clearly failed. The other half grudgingly admitted that her interpretation was technically valid according to the original wording of the law. Emperor Draxon finally broke the deadlock. The trial was created to ensure the Empress could protect the Empire. Wisdom to know your limits and seek the right allies as protection. She passes. Lord Theron looked like he'd bitten into something sour, but he couldn't argue with the Emperor's interpretation. 3 trials down. 2 to go. The 4th trial was set for the following week. Diplomatic grace. Rebecca had to host a formal banquet for 50 of the galaxy's most important and temperamental dignitaries. One wrong move, one cultural mistake, and she could trigger an interstellar incident. The noble candidates saw their opportunity. They fed her false information disguised as friendly advice. They told her the Althean ambassador loved spicy food when he was actually allergic. They said the VRYNN delegation considered eye contact respectful when they actually found it deeply offensive. They gave her wrong names, incorrect titles, and completely backward seating arrangements. Rebecca stuttered frantically, not realizing the information she'd been given was sabotage. The night of the banquet arrived. The grand hall glittered with lights from 1,000 sources. Dignitaries arrived in their finest formal wear, representing species from across the known galaxy. This was Rebecca's chance to prove she could handle high-level diplomacy. It was a disaster from the first minute. The Althean ambassador took one bite of his meal and his face turned 3 shades of purple before his assistant rushed him out of the hall, gasping for air. Rebecca had served him the spiciest dish in the palace kitchens, thinking he loved spice. He was allergic. The VRYNN delegation stood up and walked out after Rebecca made direct eye contact during her greeting speech, which they considered an act of profound disrespect. She thought it showed confidence. The seating arrangement was even worse. She'd placed the Keltharian minister right next to the Sorvan ambassador, not knowing their people had been blood enemies for 500 years. Within minutes, they were standing and shouting at each other in languages that made the translator devices spark and malfunction. Rebecca served meat to a species that considered eating flesh a mortal sin. She used a greeting that meant honored guest in one language but foolish child in another. She presented a gift to the crystalline duchess using her left hand, which apparently signified an insult in crystalline culture. Dignitaries were leaving. Ambassadors were offended. 3 separate interstellar incidents were brewing. The noble candidates watched from the sidelines with barely concealed glee. Lady Zero wasn't even trying to hide her smile. Rebecca stood in the center of the grand hall, surrounded by angry aliens and empty seats, feeling her carefully constructed composure crumbling. Her hands were shaking. She could hear whispers, see the looks of contempt and pity. She'd humiliated herself in front of the entire galaxy. Prince Kael would be so disappointed. Emperor Draxon would realize what a mistake this whole thing was. She'd be sent back to Earth having accomplished nothing except becoming a galactic joke. She felt tears burning behind her eyes and fought them back. Don't cry. Don't cry in front of everyone. That'll just make it worse. Then she remembered something her grandmother used to say when Rebecca messed up baking or broke something valuable. Honey, mistakes happen. But you know what people respect? Someone who owns up to them honestly. Pride makes everything worse. Honesty makes things better. Rebecca took a deep breath and raised her voice. Stop. Everyone, please stop. The hall gradually fell silent. Confused dignitaries paused their angry conversations. The ones who'd been leaving turned back. I need to apologize, Rebecca said, her voice cracking slightly. I've made terrible mistakes tonight. The Althean ambassador is sick because I served him something dangerous. The VRYNN delegation left because I disrespected them. The seating arrangements were wrong. The gifts were wrong. I got almost everything wrong. She looked around at all the faces watching her, some curious, some still angry, some just confused. I'm human. I'm from Earth. We've only been part of the galactic community for 15 years. I don't know your customs. I thought I did. I studied. I prepared. But the information I had was wrong, and I should have verified it better. That's on me. I take full responsibility. Some of the dignitaries exchanged glances. Candidates never admitted failure this openly. They made excuses, blamed others, tried to salvage their dignity. But here's the thing, Rebecca continued. I genuinely want to learn. I want to understand your cultures, your traditions, your worlds. Not because I'm trying to pass some test, but because you're all fascinating and I know absolutely nothing about most of you. She walked over to the Sorvan ambassador, who was still glaring at the Keltharian minister. Ambassador Trell, I put you next to your enemy and I'm so sorry. But would you tell me why? What's the history? I want to understand what I did wrong. The ambassador looked surprised. You don't know about the Keltharian massacres? No. I don't. Will you teach me? Something shifted in his expression. He began explaining a conflict that stretched back centuries. Rebecca listened, asked questions, and genuinely engaged. Other dignitaries started gathering around, first 1 or 2, then more. The Keltharian minister, realizing someone was actually trying to understand both sides of an old conflict, began offering his people's perspective. The conversation spread. Rebecca moved from group to group, asking about their customs, their foods, their protocols. What had she done wrong? Why was it wrong? What should she have done instead? The crystalline Duchess explained why left-handed gifts were insulting. The VRYNN delegation returned and taught her the proper way to show respect without eye contact. The Althean ambassador's assistant, once he'd recovered, actually laughed and explained their dietary restrictions, showing no hard feelings when Rebecca's apology was so sincere. The formal banquet transformed into something unprecedented. Dignitaries were talking to each other, sharing cultural information, telling stories about their homeworlds. The Sorvan and Keltharian, both explaining their conflict to this curious human, actually found themselves having a civil conversation for the first time in decades. By the end of the evening, Rebecca was exhausted, but the hall was buzzing with genuine warmth. The Althean ambassador himself returned, fully recovered, and declared, "In 32 years of diplomatic service, I've attended 400 formal banquets. This was the most chaotic, disastrous, and strangely wonderful one I've ever experienced. The human doesn't know our ways, but she's the first person who's actually wanted to learn them." The adjudicators had no choice but to declare she'd passed. She'd turned a catastrophic failure into a success through sheer authenticity. 4 trials down. 1 remained. The final trial was scheduled for 3 days later. The trial of sacrifice. Each candidate had to declare what they would give up for the Empire. It was held in the Grand Throne Room with every noble house in attendance, broadcast across all 12 star systems. The noble candidates went first, each trying to outdo the others. Princess Vila stepped forward, her skin shimmering with starlight. "I offer my family's armada. 300 warships and their crews. A military force worth more than some star systems." The crowd murmured approvingly. That was a serious commitment. Lady Zero went next, her silver armor gleaming. "I pledge my planet's strategic position. We control the Theta Junction, the most valuable trade route in 4 sectors. The Empire would have exclusive access." Even more impressive. Trade routes meant wealth and power. Duchess Marin materialized a diamond the size of a human head from thin air, her matter manipulation on full display. "I offer my family's mineral rights to the crystalline fields. Enough rare elements to power the Empire's fleet for a century. Plus my abilities in battle, which could turn entire wars." The offers kept coming. Fleets, planets, technologies, alliances with neighboring kingdoms. Each candidate was pledging resources that could reshape the Empire's power structure. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She stood before the throne, before Emperor Draxon, before Prince Kale, before thousands of nobles and billions watching across the stars. She wore a simple dress, not the elaborate gowns the others had chosen. She had no fleet to offer, no planets, no special powers. She took a deep breath and spoke quietly. "I would give up being chosen." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive throne room. "I never wanted this," Rebecca continued, her voice steady but soft. "I came to this empire to earn money for my brother's medical treatment. I'm a maid. I clean rooms. I fold laundry. I make beds. That's who I am." She looked at Prince Kale, who was staring at her with wide eyes. "These trials have caused so much division. Noble houses are angry. The council is split. People are taking sides. And if my presence here is hurting Prince Kale or destabilizing the Empire, then I'll leave. Right now. I'll go back to Earth, and the prince can choose someone else. Someone with armies and powers and all the things an empress should have." Her voice cracked slightly. "I just wanted to help a sad kid feel better. That's all I ever wanted. I saw a little boy who missed his mom, and I remembered missing mine, and I just wanted to make things a little easier for him. If that means I disappear so he can be happy, then that's what I'll do." Tears were running down her cheeks now, but she didn't wipe them away. "I don't have fleets or planets or special abilities. All I can offer is that I care about him. Really care. Not about the throne or the power or any of it. Just him. And if that's not enough, if my being here causes more problems than it solves, then I sacrifice my place here. Gladly." The throne room was still silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. Prince Kale stood up from his seat beside his father. His young voice rang out clear and strong. "That's exactly why it has to be her." Prince Kale walked down from the royal platform, every eye in the throne room following him. He crossed the floor and took Rebecca's hand. His voice was steady, more mature than his 8 years should allow. "Everyone keeps offering my father things. Ships and planets and money. But none of them are offering me what I actually need." He looked up at Rebecca. "She doesn't want power. She doesn't want to be empress. She just wants me to be okay. That's what my real mother was like. That's what a mother is supposed to be. He turned to face the crowd. The others would be good empresses maybe. But they'd be terrible mothers. And I need a mother more than the Empire needs another fleet. Emperor Draxon stood slowly, his ceremonial robes flowing around him. The entire room held its breath. This was the moment. He could override everything, choose someone sensible, someone powerful, someone who made political sense. When my wife was dying, Draxon said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, she made me promise something. She said the Empire would try to make me choose someone strategic, someone who fit their mold. But she made me swear to choose someone who would love our son. Not the prince. Our son. The boy, not the position. He looked at the assembled nobility, at the representatives of the great houses who'd come with their daughters and their ambitions. This council has argued that humans are weak. That Rebecca Cole is ordinary, unremarkable, unworthy. They said she'd fail every trial. He paused. She passed them all. Not by being superhuman, but by being creative, honest, humble, and authentic. She showed wisdom doesn't require telepathy. Strength doesn't require enhanced biology. And leadership doesn't require being born into the right bloodline. His gaze moved to Rebecca. My late wife once told me something I didn't fully understand at the time. She said humans possess a quality that's become rare in our galaxy. They build strength from vulnerability, wisdom from uncertainty, and unity from diversity. I dismissed it then. I was wrong. Lord Theron stood abruptly. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. A human empress? The political ramifications. The political ramifications, Draxon interrupted coldly, are that the Empire will finally live up to its own principles. We claim to value all species equally. Let's prove it. The council had no choice. Rebecca had passed all 5 trials. The law was absolute. The coronation 3 weeks later was the simplest in imperial history. Rebecca refused the traditional 6-hour ceremony with its elaborate rituals that nobody really understood anymore. Instead, she wore a modest gown, took her vows in both English and Valyrian, and insisted the whole thing last less than an hour. She also refused the title of Empress, choosing instead Empress Consort and Guardian. When asked why, she said simply, I'm not here to rule. I'm here to take care of Kale and help however I can. That's it. The noble houses watched and waited for her to fail at actual governance. They gave her 3 months before she'd crack under the pressure. They severely underestimated her. Again. Rebecca's first official act was having dinner with the palace staff. Not a formal state dinner with dignitaries. Just sitting in the palace kitchens at 11 at night with the cleaning crews, the cooks, the maintenance workers, eating leftover stew and asking about their lives. How much do you get paid? She asked a VRYN janitor named Kelly's. He told her. Her eyes went wide. That's it? How do you afford housing? Food for your family? We don't, really. Most of us share rooms. 6, 7 people in spaces meant for 2. Within a week, Rebecca had submitted a proposal to the council, the Imperial Welfare Initiative. Healthcare for all workers. Fair wages. Reasonable housing. Education subsidies for workers' children. The right to organize and petition for better conditions. Lord Theron nearly had an aneurysm. This is economic insanity. Do you know how much this would cost? Less than 1 ceremonial warship, Rebecca replied calmly. She'd done her homework. We built 3 last year just for parades. Sell 1. Use the money for people who actually need it. The council fought her. But Rebecca had something they didn't expect, public support. The workers, the servants, the billions of ordinary citizens who'd never had an advocate before, they rallied behind her. Protests erupted on 50 worlds demanding the council approve her initiatives. The measures passed. She created the Cultural Exchange Program next, bringing artists, musicians, and teachers from minor species to the imperial court. Species that had been ignored for centuries suddenly had their art displayed in the palace, their music played at state functions, their stories told. Then came the Council of Small Voices, her most radical reform. She demanded representation for species that had no noble houses, no political power, no voice in imperial affairs. The major houses screamed that it would destabilize everything. Good, Rebecca said. It should have been destabilized a long time ago. The assassination attempt started around month 4. Poisoned food, sabotaged transport ships, hired mercenaries. The old guard was desperate to remove her before she changed too much. But Rebecca had allies nobody expected. The servants who'd been invisible suddenly became her eyes and ears. They heard plots whispered in corridors, saw suspicious packages being delivered, noticed when someone was asking too many questions about her schedule. Minor species who finally had representation protected her fiercely. And Prince Kale, now truly her son in every way that mattered, refused to let her walk anywhere without at least 3 guards. The relationship between Rebecca and Emperor Draxon evolved slowly over those first months. It started as pure political arrangement, 2 people bound together by duty and circumstance. They were polite, professional, distant. But they began having conversations late at night after Kale was asleep. Draxon would explain the complex political landscape of the 12 systems. Rebecca would point out how policies looked from the perspective of ordinary people. They disagreed, sometimes intensely. She called him out when he was being elitist. He challenged her when her ideas were too idealistic. You can't just give everyone everything they want, he argued one night. I'm not trying to give everyone everything, she shot back. I'm trying to give them basic dignity. There's a difference. Somewhere in those late-night debates, something shifted. She made him laugh with stories about Earth, about growing up in a small town in Colorado, about her grandmother's terrible cooking and her brother's awful jokes. He told her about his own childhood, the pressure of being raised for the throne, the loneliness of power. 6 months after the coronation, Draxon realized he'd fallen in love with his wife. Not the dramatic, sweeping romance from holodramas, but something steadier. Something real. He loved how she challenged him, how she cared so fiercely about people he'd never thought to notice, how she made Kale laugh. 8 months in, Rebecca realized she loved him back. It surprised her. This strange, complicated man from another world who'd been forced into marrying her, who could be infuriatingly stubborn about tradition, but who also listened when she talked, changed his mind when she was right, and held her when the stress of being empress became overwhelming. They never had a grand romantic declaration. They just started holding hands. Started kissing goodnight. Started being partners in every sense of the word. The changes Rebecca brought rippled across the empire over the next 5 years. Humans began rising to positions they'd never imagined possible. Captain James Wilson became the first human to command an imperial fleet, using Earth naval tactics that confused enemy forces into surrendering. Dr. Linda Martinez pioneered medical techniques combining human surgical precision with alien biotechnology, saving thousands of lives. Ambassador David Chen negotiated peace treaties by finding common ground instead of leveraging military might. Humanity's status in the galaxy shifted. Other species stopped seeing humans as primitive or weak. They started seeing them as innovative, adaptable, creative. The species that had no special powers turned out to have the most valuable power of all, the ability to approach problems from completely different angles. Rebecca never stopped being herself. She still folded origami animals for Kale, now 13 and already taller than her. She still had dinners with the staff every month. She still wore simple dresses instead of elaborate gowns when she could get away with it. She still spoke in plain language that made the nobility wince but made ordinary citizens feel heard. One evening, she stood on the imperial balcony with Kale and Draxon, looking out over the capital city. Lights from 1,000 species twinkled below, all living together in an empire that had learned, slowly and painfully, to value everyone. Do you ever regret it? Kale asked. He was growing into a thoughtful young man, training in both combat and philosophy, learning to lead with both strength and compassion. Giving up your normal life? Rebecca considered the question honestly. Sometimes I miss the simplicity. I miss Earth. I miss my brother, even though he visits twice a year now. Being empress is hard and scary and half the time I still feel like I'm faking it. But? Draxon prompted, putting his arm around her waist. But I think about all the humans working across the galaxy who have better lives now because one human maid somehow became empress. I think about the kids from minor species who can dream bigger because they have representation. I think about workers who can afford to feed their families because they finally get fair wages. She smiled. And I think about this kid right here, who's going to be an amazing emperor someday. Kale groaned. Don't start. Too late. I'm your mother. Embarrassing you is literally my job. Draxon laughed, pulling both of them close. Below them, the empire sprawled vast and complex, flawed but improving, slowly becoming something better than it had been. The human maid had become empress not by being superhuman, but by being courageously, authentically human. She'd shown the galaxy that you didn't need special powers to make a difference. You just needed to care, to try, to be willing to fail and learn and keep going anyway. Those were the most human qualities of all. And they'd open doors for humanity that no amount of military conquest ever could have achieved. Years later, when historians wrote about this era, they called it the Great Reformation. But Rebecca always thought of it differently. She just tried to help a sad kid. Everything else had followed from that one simple act of kindness. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again. More importantly, humans would never underestimate themselves.